Hello, everyone, and good evening. I am Steve Koch, Associate Director for Leadership Programs within the Office of Student Involvement, and I welcome you all to the annual Reverend John Stack OSA Leadership Series, formerly our Spotlight on Leadership program. This unique co-curricular program is designed to showcase an individual who embodies exemplary leadership and has impacted the world we live in positive ways. Over the years, our esteemed speakers have highlighted a common message, and that is, as leaders, we need to lead with integrity, honesty, kindness, and generosity. These are foundational principles and essential for meaningful human connection. Tonight, Kerry Alys Robinson, President and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, will discuss her path of leadership and how she has answered the call to serve people in need. Kerry advocates for justice and social structures, and she will explore with us how we all can be beacons of hope in our own communities. Before we hear from Kerry, I would like to acknowledge a few of our event supporters: the Office of Student Involvement, Athletics, the Ann Welsh McNulty Institute for Women's Leadership, the Office of Mission and Ministry, the Center for Peace and Justice Education, the St. Thomas of Villanova Center for the Common Good, and our Connolly Center Event and Operations team. Let's please offer a round of applause for our wonderful partners. It is now with great pleasure that I welcome to the podium a true servant leader, one who elevates the Villanova community daily through purpose, mentorship, and connection. Please welcome our Vice President of Student Life, Kathy Burns.
Thank you, Steve. It is really my genuine pleasure to be with you this evening and to add my welcome to Steve's. This is one of my favorite events over the course of the year as we think about leadership and how each of us might be an influencer for positive change, whether on campus or more globally around the world. I want to thank Kerry for being with us tonight. I think you will learn more about her soon, and I feel very grateful for the chance to be in her company and to have the chance to learn even more from her. I also want to thank the Mbezi family and the Patriarch Family Foundation, whose generosity make this evening possible. And I want to thank Charles Mbezi for being here tonight. The Mbezi family has offered its philanthropic stewardship in so many areas of Villanova over so many years. And the support for this talk that leads to conversations about leadership, that leads to conversations about positive change in our world, helping students find purpose and passion, truly inspires me. So thank you. And now I want to also thank, as we see the Reverend John Stack OSA Leadership Series, to say a little bit about Father Stack, first by thanking his family members who are with us in the audience. We have some sisters, some brothers-in-law, some nieces, some nephews. Probably in a couple years we'll have some great nieces and great nephews as they get old enough to join us. And I would like to share a word about Father Stack, as many of us knew him, for whom this series is named. Father Stack served as the Dean of Students from 1982 to 1999, and then as Vice President for Student Life from 1999 to 2021. He had a very long tenure on our campus. I was lucky enough to work with him for 31 years. Tonight especially, I think back to 2002, when Patty Mbezi, Charles's mother, who was then on the Board of Trustees and a Villanova parent, and Father Stack embarked together on a new initiative, engaging Villanova parents who might be interested in learning more about the school and offering their stewardship to help Villanova as an institution to become what we are not yet. Patty Mbezi and Father Stack were a great team. They helped create a legacy of parent involvement and parent philanthropy that continues to grow stronger, supporting Villanova each year. Now, many of you here did not know Father Stack. Others here knew him and loved him, whether as brother, uncle, friend, educator, colleague, or priest. He left an imprint on those he encountered. And how did he do that? I suspect Kerry's remarks may shed some light on what made Father Stack so special, though she never met him. He cared about people, always. He cared about people more than he cared about things or status or money or even the rules. He had a way of making each person in his life, whether in his life for decades or for a day, feel known and feel valued. He gave this gift of love, of acknowledgement, and the gift of love, of stewardship, if you will, is what God calls us to be in relationship with others and to love and to act on that love. This is what Father Stack did, and that is the beauty of this leadership series being named after him, because that's what all good leaders do. Thank you again for being here tonight with us. It's my great pleasure now to invite to the podium the leader, the caregiver, the one who acts with love every day, serves faithfully to Villanova for the last 18 years as our university president, Father Peter Donahue.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you all for being here tonight. Before we allow Kerry to come up here and dazzle us with her life and what she has accomplished, I just want to do a simple housekeeping lesson, because Kerry has spent some time with Villanova and has become very impressed with who we are as a community and the kinds of people that we are. And so I invite all of you to listen carefully to her message, but more importantly, we sometimes have a tendency that once the talk is over, we all run out of here. And I'm asking you to kind of stay and wait for the questions. Because sometimes, a person, I know this from experience, sometimes a person has a very well planned out speech to give, and then all of a sudden people start asking questions and really put you on the spot about how do you really live out that message that you just gave. So I would encourage all of you to stay for the questions, because for those of you in ACS, it will really help make the paper a different experience, rather than, I left right after she finished, and I don't remember anything that she said after that, so I'm inviting you to stay. As I said, Kerry has become very well known here at Villanova, primarily because of an event that we had here not too long ago called the Opus Prize. Some of you may remember all of the hoopla that was around campus, the cubes out on the lawns, and Kerry was the person who kind of twisted our arm to get us to do that incredible experience here, and so we thank her for that. But my encounters with Kerry is that she is very good at twisting arms, because she twisted mine several years ago to get involved in another project that we have been involved with for a couple of years as one of the leading sponsors on the Catholic University side of things. So Kerry is very good at arm twisting. And so now for the prepared statement they've given me to read about her. Kerry Robinson is president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA. Kerry was the founding executive director of Leadership Roundtable and now serves as a member of its board of trustees. Leadership Roundtable is dedicated to promoting excellence and best practices in the management, finances, and human resources development of the Catholic Church by harnessing the managerial expertise and financial acumen of senior-level lay executives. That's what she twisted my arm to get involved in. Kerry has been an advisor to and a trustee of more than 25 grant-making foundations, charitable nonprofits, and family philanthropies. Kerry's most recently served as the executive director of the Opus Prize Foundation, which is responsible for an annual international $1 million prize honoring people of faith whose lives are dedicated to the alleviation of human suffering. If you were here during that time period, it was an incredible event for Villanova. It was a week-long event, and I was so happy that we said yes to the invitation, because I really think it made a change in this campus and the way we see people and the kinds of work they do, and the opportunity that we had to meet 3 very incredible people who are really servant leaders and are unheralded where they are. And this gave them a chance to have a little spotlight on them. So we were very grateful for having the opportunity to host that event. Kerry has served as the director of the development for St. Thomas More Catholic Chapel and Center at Yale University and led a successful $75 million fundraising drive to expand and endow the chapel's intellectual and spiritual ministry and to construct a Catholic student center on Yale's campus. Kerry is the author of the prize-winning book, Imagining Abundance, Fundraising, Philanthropy, and a Spiritual Call to Service. She and her husband, Dr. Michael Capello, a professor and chair of the Department of Epidemiology and Microbial Diseases at Yale School of Public Health, and a professor of pediatrics and microbial pathogenesis at Yale Medical School. They have 2 children, Christopher and Sophie. I wasn't sure whether it was Sophie or Sophia. We'll go by Sophie. Would she prefer that? Okay, that's good. So we'll call her Sophie. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Villanova's pleasure to welcome Kerry Robinson.
Honestly, Father Peter, your arms look great to me. Thank you, Father Peter, for welcoming me back to Villanova so graciously. You are among my favorite orators and hosts. Thank you also to Steve and Kathy for your kind hospitality and for setting the stage for this evening so beautifully. As Father Peter noted, it is my great fortune that this is the second time in 5 months that I have had a reason to visit this beautiful campus. I spent an unforgettable week here in November for the presentation of the Opus Prize, which is an annual $1 million international humanitarian award that honors people of faith whose lives are dedicated to the alleviation of human suffering. The prize recognizes unsung heroes who are addressing the world's most persistent social problems. Until very recently, I was the executive director of the foundation that awards the prize, which led to the extraordinary blessing of working for 18 months in close collaboration with the Villanova Opus Prize co-chairs, Alicia Dunphy-Culp and Nick Tumalo, and with their right-hand woman, Caroline Levine, and so many outstanding members of Villanova's faculty and student body. It makes me so happy to see so many of you here tonight. Honestly, it feels a bit like we are getting the band back together. For the Opus Prize, the university identified a cadre of anonymous spotters who were commissioned to nominate candidates from across the globe who fit the profile of living lives of service. A jury formed by Father Peter selected 3 finalists from the nominations. It was only at this point that the nominees were notified that they had been nominated in the first place and selected as finalists for this $1 million prize. They didn't apply, they didn't seek this out, and they certainly didn't even know about it until our phone call, in which we do our very best to assure them of the legitimacy, authenticity, and sincerity of the prize. Believe me, that does take some convincing. Once convinced, the finalists agreed to let me lead a delegation of Villanova students and faculty to visit and learn from each of them and to see their work in action. We were all changed for the better by these encounters. To be in the presence of Opus Prize finalists, to witness their work on behalf of others, to be infected by their joy and purpose, to have our hearts cracked open with compassion, this was an experience of awe and reverence. I will always be grateful to you, Father Peter, for letting me twist your arm, and to Villanova University for being such a perfect partner to work with, to host this inspiring award. You all won my heart. I love this university. And it may be too raw a subject, But had Villanova qualified for the NCAA March Madness tournament, you can be sure I would have backed them all the way in my brackets. And I say this as a Georgetown alum who has still not recovered from that devastating loss to Villanova so many years ago. I digress. A final note about the Opus Prize at Villanova. All 3 finalists were inspiring, but it was the laureate, Bishop Paride Taban, founder of the Holy Trinity Peace Village in South Sudan, that took our breath away. Throughout the brutal civil war in Sudan, Bishop Taban refused to leave. As a prominent faith leader, he was given every opportunity of safe passage out of the country, but he refused to leave while his people were suffering and in danger. He stayed to be close to the people of Sudan. As waves of violence washed across the country, he was in grave danger. Bishop Taban was captured, imprisoned, and tortured. For 100 days, he was detained and subjected to brutality. And when he was finally released, the first thing he did was to return to the place of his captivity to give food to his captors. Who among us cannot see the radical sanctity in that action, that instinct, that utter magnanimity? In the face of so much violence and poverty, despair and isolation, his faith compelled him to effect peace and to provide nourishment and hope and to set the conditions where all could flourish by creating the Peace Village. That week at Villanova in the fall made a deep impression on me. People who live lives of service have a contagious, irresistible quality to them. The spirit of hospitality and meaningful engagement so evident on this campus and in this community left me ennobled and deeply grateful. Which brings us to this evening and my genuine exhilaration at the invitation to return to Villanova for this prestigious occasion. I'm humbled to be part of a lecture series named in honor of Father John Stack, who I know is one of the most important and impactful leaders in Villanova's history. I'd like to thank Father Stack's sisters, Maureen, Joanne, and Mary Ellen, for joining us this evening. Now, I have not conducted a scientific study, but anecdotally, many of my favorite, highly effective, and truly pastoral priests, bishops, and cardinals all seem to have one thing in common: the indelible influence of their sisters. Thanks also to the Mbezi family and the Patriarch Family Foundation for all that you do here at Villanova and for your generosity that makes this series in honor of Father Stack possible. 1 month ago, my husband and I woke to the news that our friend of nearly 15 years had died. Almost certainly, he had been murdered. You may have heard of our friend. He has been in the news quite a bit since his death. His name is Alexei Navalny, and he was Russian President Putin's opposition leader and an anti-corruption advocate. We first met Alexei Navalny when he came to Yale University for the Yale World Fellows Program, an international leadership residency program of which my husband Michael served as director. Alexei brought his wife Yulia and their young children, Dasha and Zahar, with him to campus for the semester. It was our habit and indeed privilege to host Yale World Fellows and their families at our home on Sunday afternoons for a simple home-cooked meal. Our children, who were also young for the 8 years my husband served as director of the program, were deeply influenced by our international friends from 78 countries. We took a particular liking to Alexei and Yulia and their children, and we stayed in touch and met with them during their occasional return trips to the U.S. When news of Alexei's death was announced, we heard from many who knew of our friendship with him. It was striking how many people, despite having never met Alexei, felt a genuine loss themselves. confessed to deep emotion at the injustice of his death, and felt that this was a great loss not only for his family, but in a certain cosmic sense for the world. What Alexei's life and death and the response to his life and death reveal to me is our deep yearning for moral heroism. We are hungry for moral heroes and the compelling values that inform and sustain such heroism. Alexei's courage was evident from our very first days of meeting him. To be repeatedly falsely charged and imprisoned by Putin, released only to be brazenly poisoned by Putin, saved by courageous pilots and doctors, dramatically airlifted out of Russia to Germany, and after months of medical rehabilitation, returned to Russia knowing he would be arrested and likely worse, is extraordinary. Those who loved him begged him not to return to Russia for his own safety. That he did so because of a radical commitment to the cause for which he had dedicated his life, shining a spotlight on the corruption of his country and the brutality of its president, and advocating for justice, truth, and democracy is a sign of Alexei's integrity. He gave his life for others, for truth, democracy, an end to the war in Ukraine, an end to corruption in his country. And Alexei's example continues to inspire acts of service and moral courage all over the world, but especially in his home country. Thousands of people attended his funeral in person, even though they knew they might be targeted by the government and arrested as a result. Equally courageous and committed is his wife, Yulia, who has taken up his mantle of leadership. It's a powerful and inspiring reminder. Courage begets courage. Selflessness inspires selflessness. The starting point for living a life of service is to pay attention to the role models in our midst. Look for moral heroism and concomitant tenacious dedication to the values which inform such heroism. What resonates with you? What moves your heart? Who restores your faith in humankind? Who makes you want to be a better person? Who ennobles you? These examples do not have to be as stark or dramatic as that of Alexei. Living a life of service does not and should not require you to willingly give up your own life. But I assure you that if you look with intention, you will easily identify examples in your own life. It could be your parent, a neighbor, a professor, a close friend. It could be someone whose life you have been exposed to while at Villanova, someone like Father Stack, who was committed to being a beneficial presence in the world. From what I've read and what I've learned about Father Stack since accepting this invitation, it's clear how exceptional he was. Exceptional in his devotion to Villanova and its students. Exceptional in how approachable, how present, and how considerate he was to all he encountered. Exceptional in how he embodied the very values upon which this university was built. Veritas, Unitas, Caritas, truth, unity, and love. Identifying and emulating the people who serve as your own moral heroes will help clarify your purpose and direction in life. That practice has radically influenced the trajectory of my own. For as long as I have been aware, I've loved and held the potential of the Catholic Church in the highest esteem. Its explicitly religious mission has formed the person I am. But the fact that it is the largest humanitarian network in the world renders me forever committed to its health and vitality. I was exposed to the church at a very young age through the Raskob Foundation for Catholic Activities. 5 generations of our family have served the church through the instrument of this foundation. Nearly 80 years ago, our great-grandparents, Helena and John Raskob, established the Philanthropic Foundation with 2 intentions. They wanted all of the foundation's resources to be used exclusively to support the Catholic Church's religious and humanitarian work throughout the world, and they wanted their children and descendants to be stewards of the foundation's resources as volunteers. Participating in the work of the foundation has radically enlarged our perspective of the church and introduced us, even as teenagers, to the astoundingly diverse forms of ministry under its auspices. As a child, I was drawn to women and men, ordained, religious, and lay, whose faith mattered deeply to them and who stood at the vanguard of human suffering all over the world and responded by alleviating that suffering, by providing food, safe shelter, education, and health care, by advocating for those in distress, by championing justice, by sowing the seeds of peace. I was mesmerized by people who dedicated their lives to others through service. I observed that while these childhood role models often bore witness to the worst that humankind does to one another and to our common home, there was a palpable sense of joy about them. Joy. Their lives were imbued with purpose and meaning. I admired their faith, their interior freedom, and their joy. I aspired to be like them, but suspected I could never be so holy, so selfless, so other-centered. So from a young age, I basically begged God to let me do something with my life behind the scenes that would positively contribute to the lives of my moral heroes. As I grew into adulthood, I thought I would make my life's work in the field of faith-based philanthropy, helping Catholic funders and foundations make sound philanthropic investments in people and social enterprises. It is both funny and true that if you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. Instead of working in the sector that gave money away, I was asked to be responsible for raising it by serving as the Director of Development at St. Thomas More Catholic Chapel and Center at Yale University. This was a job I neither wanted nor was qualified for in any way. Father Bob Boulogne, the Catholic chaplain at Yale, who would become my closest friend and prime collaborator, called me to explain the $5 million capital campaign and assured me it would be a piece of cake, a walk in the park, and that there would be absolutely no stress or anxiety involved. And then he asked me to be the person to lead this fundraising effort, adding, "Kerry, your name came to me in prayer." Still to this day, the best development pickup line I've ever heard. Now let me be very clear, I did not want this job. I dreaded the very idea of this job. I scrambled to think how I could decline politely. I suddenly remembered I was pregnant with my second child. I told him the happy news. There was silence on the phone. And then, with genuine enthusiasm, he congratulated me, told me how happy he was for me, and said, "You can work from home." And then he said, "I know I am springing this on you. Please, just pray about this for 5 days. Whatever your answer in prayer is, of course I will accept and honor it." Brilliant, I thought. After 5 days of praying, my no will be especially eloquent and convincing. Anyone who has ever taken prayer seriously knows it is the one praying who has changed. To my astonishment, even to this day, 5 days later, I called him and accepted. We served together for almost a decade, modeling lay clergy collaboration, holding up a vision of what a Catholic intellectual and spiritual center of consequence could look like at a world-class university. We raised 15 times the original goal, a staggering $75 million, introduced 14 new programmatic initiatives, built a Caesar Pelli-designed Catholic Student Center on Yale's campus, added a third Sunday liturgy to accommodate the growing number of students and faculty participating, and raised the bar of Catholic campus ministry across the country. This is what we learned. Generosity is humankind's birthright. We are all called to be generous and to be catalysts to inspire generosity in others. A common misconception is that generosity is only for the very wealthy. Believing that lets the rest of us off the hook and denies ourselves a full, rewarding life. Central to Christianity is the conviction that one finds life first by giving it away. The point is best illustrated by a story of another moral hero, Mother Teresa. The setting is a food dispensing center in rural India in the midst of severe poverty and hunger. Once a week, one member of every family in the impoverished village would line up with a single bucket, patiently waiting their turn to have the religious sisters fill their bucket with dry grains of rice. A novice was shadowing Mother Teresa on this day as she methodically greeted each person and filled each bucket. Before long, an elderly woman reached the front of the line and, to the novice's surprise, had in her possession 2 buckets. Mother Teresa greeted her by name and proceeded to fill 1 bucket. After thanking Mother Teresa, the woman turned to leave, stopping a short distance later to empty half of the full bucket into the second empty bucket. The novice, miserable to be witness to the extent of the pervasive hunger and deprivation, turned to Mother Teresa and asked, "Why did we not fill up both buckets for that poor elderly woman?" Mother Teresa replied, "There is only enough rice for each family to receive 1 bucket. She has her neighbor's bucket and her own. Her neighbors are ill, and no one from the family is able to come to collect the rice. She is emptying half of her family's share into her neighbor's bucket to bring to them because she cannot carry more." Overwhelmed with sorrow, the novice said, "Surely we should fill both buckets and take the second bucket to the sick family for her." Mother Teresa stopped what she was doing and admonished the novice. "These are among the poorest and most destitute people you will ever meet," she said. "Never take away the right of another person to be generous." Never take away the right of another person to be generous. We are called to be generous. Sure, we can and should be generous with our financial resources. We can also be generous with our time, with our attention. We can volunteer. We can share what we have and what is precious to us. We can donate. We can be generous by extending the benefit of the doubt, by presuming goodness in others. We can be generous listeners. We can extend forgiveness. Think about one moral hero in your life. Inevitably, you will find a reservoir of generosity there too. For 7 months in my new role as president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, I have been asked what my impressions are. Is there anything surprising? Am I happy? I am surprised to find myself in the role. That's the first thing that surprises me. A year ago, I had no idea this was in my future. I'm so grateful for all the factors that conspired to bring me to the role, however. For it is the honor of my lifetime to be part of the Catholic Charities Network, to work with such accomplished and dedicated colleagues, to witness moral heroism every single day, in every single agency across thousands of our neighborhoods. What's more, it feels as though everything in my life has led me to this moment of service. My colleagues at the national office are professionals of uncommon skill and expertise, as accomplished as they are compassionate. They have quickly become good friends and confidants. One of my beloved colleagues is with me tonight, Kevin Brennan. In my first few months in this role, I've found when I speak to groups or in individual conversations that some people are unsure about what exactly Catholic Charities does. And that is understandable. In fact, there's a very good reason why people have trouble precisely pointing to what we do. The life-changing ministries of Catholic Charities are varied and vast. Every day, in every corner of the U.S., Catholic Charities agencies provide comfort, hope, and relief to people in need, regardless of their faith or background. A common misperception is that Catholic Charities exists to serve Catholics in need. In fact, we serve all people of all backgrounds, people of all faiths or no faith. As the famous saying goes, we don't serve people in need because they are Catholic. We serve people in need because we are Catholic. Our clients face practically any challenge you can imagine. A family whose home was demolished in an instant by a tornado. An expectant mother who is unsure of how to care for a newborn baby. A veteran looking to develop new skills and launch a new career. A single father struggling to afford groceries for his family. A refugee starting a new life in an unfamiliar country. A senior barely able to afford her medication and living in a dilapidated apartment. A person in recovery struggling with depression. A family materially impoverished living out of their car. This could be any one of us, any one of our family members, any one of our neighbors. One of my all-time favorite observations by Father Greg Boyle is, "This is what we seek, a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it." The people we serve all have one thing in common. They need help, they yearn for mercy, they need compassion, and they know they can find it at Catholic Charities. The scale of our network's work is difficult to comprehend, but I'll share a few numbers to put it in perspective. There are 168 Catholic Charities agencies in the United States and its territories. Last year alone, Catholic Charities staff and volunteers around the country provided care to 15 million people in need. They served 30 million meals to those who were food insecure and hungry. More than 30,000 clients received critical career training and were placed into new jobs. 620,000 Americans received behavioral health and wellness services. Our agencies provided 38,000 permanent, affordable housing units for families, seniors, veterans, and others in need of a decent place to live. And they responded to a staggering 59 climate-related disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, and more, helping reeling communities and families recover and rebuild. All of this just in 1 year. We have been at this work in the United States of America for more than 110 years. You have a wonderful, living, breathing example of this work right here in your backyard in the form of the life-changing ministries of Catholic Social Services of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Led by the wonderful Heather Hewitt, Catholic Social Services impacts more than 600,000 individuals, including roughly 100,000 children each year. What a blessing they are to the greater Philadelphia area. I've spent much of my first months on the job visiting Catholic Charities agencies around the country and witnessing their life-changing work. Allow me to share two brief stories from the agencies I have visited. My very first visit was to a Catholic Charities agency in my new role was to the border, the southern border. I went to Laredo, Texas, where I visited La Frontera Migrant Shelter, which is a Catholic Charities respite center for migrants who have been processed by the federal government and approved to enter the country as they seek asylum and go through the immigration legal process. These migrant families, many of whom have traveled for months through life-threatening conditions to come to the United States, spend 1 or 2 nights at the respite center. They receive basic humanitarian care, a place to sleep, a nourishing meal, a warm shower, donated clothing. Then they move on to the cities where their immigration sponsors live to continue their journeys. While Catholic Charities of Laredo has an exceptional staff, they cannot do this merciful work alone, and they rely on volunteers. 2 of the volunteers I encountered there touched my heart, and they are a wonderful example of living lives of service. Sister Joyce Bates and Sister Rosanna Mellert are elderly members of the Sisters of Notre Dame in Ohio. They first visited La Frontera during the pandemic after receiving their COVID vaccines early due to their age category. They were part of a national movement of women religious mobilizing to help, to go to the border and to offer humanitarian care to the growing number of migrants crossing the border each day. It was supposed to be a short stay. Instead, so moved by the people they encountered, Sister Joyce and Sister Rosanna petitioned their order to allow them to permanently relocate to Laredo. Now, still as volunteers, they run the kitchen and food service at La Frontera. What struck me most about Sister Joyce and Sister Rosanna was not just their selflessness, but again, the joyful manner they go about their service work. Sister Rosanna loves to bake, and she bakes cupcakes at home each night so that she can bring them to the shelter the next morning. When the price of eggs went up last year, Sister Rosanna experimented with various alternate recipes, and she now resourcefully makes her cupcakes with applesauce, which is regularly donated to the shelter instead of eggs. These sisters don't just ensure that the migrants eat a nutritious meal. They sing and play games with the children. They help to organize Christmas celebrations in December. They treat everyone they encounter with dignity and respect. They represent the best of us. The second story I offer is about a Catholic Charities client, which is what our agencies call the people they serve. Last week, I was in Maui to meet with the staff of Catholic Charities Hawaii and support them in their efforts to help the community recover from the devastating fires last August. More than 100 people died in those fires, and thousands more were displaced from their homes. As the official disaster relief agency of the Catholic Church in the U.S., our team at Catholic Charities USA quickly sprang into action, raising funds and sharing expertise to support the local relief efforts. One woman that Catholic Charities of Hawaii has served is named Michelle Leon. At the time of the fire, she was living in Lahaina, the popular tourist destination that was particularly devastated, in a rented home with her partner, 2 children, and 13 grandchildren. When their lease expired in August, just before the wildfires, they couldn't find a large enough house. The family split up. Then the house Michelle was moving into burned down, as did the houses and apartments her other family members moved to, as well as Michelle's elderly parents' house, displacing 17 family members in all. What followed was a succession of hotels where they were put up by the Red Cross and apartments with rental assistance from Catholic Charities of Hawaii. Michelle was out of work for a few months, not because the auto mechanic shop where she worked was destroyed, but because residents weren't allowed back into the burn zone until October. Many others in Michelle's position would have found a way to leave Hawaii by now, as many of her former neighbors have. But that's not an option for her with parents aged 90 and 91. Michelle says she won't leave her parents ever. The fire didn't just take away Michelle's home and belongings. It also impacted her sense of self. Before the fire, she volunteered as the outreach coordinator for her local Catholic church, directing people in need of services to agencies that can assist them. She organized monthly community projects, such as packing bags for the elderly and those in need. But now, being on the receiving end of that kind of help, even in the short term, was very hard for her. While she says it was a great blessing to be put up in a hotel and receive rental assistance, she turned down additional relief funds once she started working again. Why? So that the money could be distributed to someone else who needed it even more than she did. Can you imagine that? This is a woman whose life and family were completely upended by a natural disaster. And the minute she starts working again, she turns down help so that she can help others. What an inspiration. Michelle is now helping to plan a retreat day for parishioners and members of the community in need of spiritual, mental, and physical healing, a project that she's particularly excited about. People like Sister Joy, Sister Rosanna, and Michelle are reasons for our hope. They represent the Catholic Church at her very best, and that is a powerful, important thing. To be clear, a life of service can be led by anyone, and anyone can devote their life to making this a better, more just and merciful world. You don't need faith to do this. I am struck, however, by the presence and persistence of faith in the examples of the change agents and moral heroes I've encountered over the whole course of my life. Before dismissing faith as irrelevant to a meaningful life of service, consider that faith offers two important things, at least: a community to sustain, inspire, encourage, console, forgive, and hold us accountable, and access to transcendence. Working to make the world better, living a life of service, even in a faith-based context, can be demanding and difficult. Working to reform the church, to call it to greater levels of holiness and effectiveness, can also be daunting. For 20 years, in the wake of the revelations about the church's abuse crisis, I worked with Catholic leaders across the country through Leadership Roundtable to bring greater accountability, transparency, justice for victim survivors, and contemporary best managerial practices to the church. The church is our faith family. When your family is in crisis, you do everything possible to effect healing and reconciliation. To do nothing would have been to be complicit. For all of my deep love and dedication of the church, at times it has utterly broken my heart. Perhaps there have been times when it has broken your heart too. Manifested ignoble qualities, clericalism, sexism, mediocrity, exclusion. In times of desolation like this, the best advice I have ever been given came from a beloved professor, spiritual director, and sister of mercy. She said, "Remember what it is you most love about the church and membership in it. Name what you love, claim what you love. It will provide ballast to allow you to navigate with fidelity and focus when you are disappointed and discouraged." I have taken this advice to heart and highly recommend the discipline. My list is long and wide. I love Catholic social justice teaching, our church's rich intellectual tradition, sacramental life and imagination, mercy, the Eucharist, the primacy of conscience, prayer and transcendence, forgiveness, the preferential option for the poor and most vulnerable, the injunction to be Christ-like. I love our church's emphasis on forming young adults and education, as evidenced by Villanova and so many other wonderful examples of Catholic education across the world. I love that wherever there is human suffering in this world, the church is at the vanguard of providing relief, promoting justice, and advocating for peace. I love our church's appreciation of beauty and aesthetics, the art and architecture, music and literature our faith has inspired. I'm daily grateful for Pope Francis. I love that Catholic Charities represents the teachings of the gospel made manifest, concretely in real life, and that this work makes a tangible difference in the lives of the most vulnerable all over the country. And in my grief over losing my dear friend, Father Bob Boulogne from Yale, to brain cancer, I'm grateful more than I can say for our church's articulation of the community of saints, the conviction of eternal life, the fact that love doesn't end with death. I'm reminded of Father Gino Walsh's famous injunction: followers of Jesus are promised two things. Your life will have meaning, and you will live forever. If you get a better offer, take it. If and when you have moments of doubt or disappointment in our church, I hope that you will find and focus on your own sources of inspiration and encouragement, your own examples of moral heroism. It is never too late to become the person you are meant to be, and it is never too late to be generous, to serve, to cultivate a disposition of other-centeredness, and to work for the common good. The Opus Prize laureate, Bishop Taban, was an elderly man near the very end of his life when he was nominated for the Opus Prize. Sister Joyce and Sister Rosanna are in their 70s and 80s, respectively. Some people have lived their entire lives in service to others. Some immerse themselves consciously in service when they retire. The Ignatian Volunteer Corps is an example of a ministry that prepares and places retirees in service. Anyone at any age who genuinely gives of themselves to help others, especially those who are poor, who are suffering, who are in need of mercy and help, always, always, always says the same thing: I received far more than I ever gave. We are at a world-class university here at Villanova, one that is Catholic, founded in the Augustinian charism that places a premium on the values of truth, unity, and love. And everything that is done at this inspiring university orients students to these values. When you are part of the Augustinian tradition, you are reminded more than most that our hearts are restless until they rest in God, that we yearn for meaning and belonging. I'll end with a story that demonstrates how utterly crucial and important young adults are to everything we hold dear. One evening, several years ago, neighbors, relatives, and friends somewhat spontaneously gathered on our porch in New Haven, Connecticut. Lively conversation commenced, and then the subject turned rather suddenly to the best way to die. The question was specific in its intensity. How would you like to experience your own death? Over bottles of soda and wine and water, especially the sodas, and candlelight and music, we took turns articulating the pros and cons of the myriad ways any one of us might experience our own death. Now, it was not entirely morbid. One friend was certain that dying in her sleep peacefully after the end of a long, long life would be the most desirable. Another suggested that she would like to die suddenly and quickly, without warning, ideally after a spectacularly joyful celebration with everyone she knew and loved. Okay, that was me. Another suggested that he would prefer to have as much time as possible with the knowledge of a terminal illness in order to make amends, to thank his friends and family, and to be intentional about giving away everything he possessed. And so the conversation ensued until the eldest at the table, my father, turned to the youngest at the table, our then teenage daughter. She was 13. Sophie, you have been very quiet and very attentive, but you have not yet volunteered an answer. My father says, do you have an opinion on the way you would most like to die? Everything became still and silent. I held my breath. Too late, I wondered if she was too young for such deep, existential, distressing discourse. Perhaps she had never seriously considered the matter. Now, at the center of everyone's attention, aware that a response was being asked of her, she replied very simply, yes, I hope I die saving someone else's life. None of these answers were bad answers, but only one was truly Christ-like, the teenagers. This is just one of the reasons why universities like Villanova are so important to our communities, to our church, to our country, and to our world. Villanova places young adults at the center of its care, has young adults as the primary focus of its mission, and surrounds them with values that are consonant with faith, encouraging them to live lives of service and to cultivate the values that inform moral heroism. I leave you with the hope that we can all emulate our moral heroes and heroines, that we will find inspiration in people like Alexei, Father Stack, Bishop Taban, Mother Teresa, Sister Joyce, Sister Rosanna, and Michelle. Identify the causes you care about most and try to make a difference. Find your own moral heroes and strive to emulate them. Be a beneficial presence in the world like Father Stack. When you cultivate the discipline of being other-centered, you begin to take genuine delight in the good fortune of others. And when you take genuine delight in the good fortune of others, you will never be without a reason to celebrate. Students in particular, you have the benefit of this world-class education here at Villanova and are exposed to the arts, humanities, world-renowned mural arts of Philadelphia, drama, right, Father Peter? Literature and theology, all so good for the soul. Children who create will not destroy. You have probably been told that you can do anything, be anything you want to be. There is truth to that, but your fulfillment will be magnified when you couple your ambition and your vocation with a commitment to creating and contributing rather than hoarding or diminishing. I can promise you this, the more you focus on serving others, on finding ways to be generous, the more fulfilling and joyful your life will be. The fact that you came here on a Monday night to listen to a talk about living a life of service already gives me great hope that you will succeed in this endeavor. So thank you all for being a reason for my hope this evening. It has been an honor and truly my delight to be with you tonight. So I know that I am meant to stay up here and take any questions or rebuttals. Nothing is off limits. Please feel free to ask me about anything you heard or anything that is on your mind. And there are microphones at the front, yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Robinson, for taking the time to speak to us today. My name is Kenna Rugia, but my chosen confirmation name is Teresa, after Mother Teresa. Like you, I was moved by her works when I was young and even still, but I often find it hard to stay rooted in the service mindset with how loud and busy the world is today. What was the moment you felt fully and truly connected to God and inspired to lead the life you do with such fervor?
It's a beautiful question, and I love that your confirmation name is after Mother Teresa. My earliest memory of that, what you're describing, which can be elusive, right? My earliest memory is when I was about 8 years old, and I come from a huge family, not too far from here in Avondale, Pennsylvania, like right over the Delaware line. And we have this big family, so there was a lot of conviviality, and I was the eldest grandchild, but still young at this point. And I excused myself from the celebration, and I took a walk around this lake near my grandparents' home. And I just remember feeling so much gratitude, so much joy that I got to be part of this family, and that everybody was getting along, and it was just this fun evening. And my 8-year-old self could not find the words to express the gratitude. And as I was taking the walk, I had this sudden sense that I didn't need to find the words, that words were unhelpful or immaterial, that I was being accompanied by God. You know, I assumed it was Christ, honestly, and the whole thing was still sort of surprising to me, but I felt this enormous sense of peace that I didn't have to struggle to find the words to say, God, I'm so grateful and thank you. And I think that has impacted my association with faith, with joy and consolation. It's a beautiful question.
Hi, right here. Down
Oh,
here.
great.
Hi, my name is Colin. Thank you for being here. My mom is a capital campaign manager in Charleston, South Carolina, so she's a huge fan. So I'm asking this question like for her kind of, but also for myself. So I also want to thank the Department of Peace and Justice. I've learned a lot through them. I'm a neuroscience major with a minor in peace and justice. And what I've really loved to learn about is like substance use disorders and like addiction studies and things like that. And through that, I've learned a lot about like poverty alleviation and like the unique poverty that we have in Philadelphia. We have like a huge housing crisis that's super unique just to Philadelphia. And then we also have other places around us like Norristown and things like that that are having like huge like housing displacement issues. So my question for that is, you know, there's a lot of students on campus that have the energy to do something, but not necessarily the place to do it. And it might be, you know, daunting or hard to find it. So I guess I was asking, like, I'm hoping to ask, does Catholic Charities have like steps, or do they normally support or, you know, provide, you know, whether that be funding or just any support to student groups or, you know, local things like that? So like if I wanted to start something, or if anyone in this room wanted to start something to like go out and do something and they don't really feel like they can yet, does Catholic Charities have like steps for that?
Oh, Catholic Charities always, we could not, literally could not do what we do in the face of all of the poverty and needs that you have alluded to if it weren't for volunteers. Last year alone, there were 215,000 volunteers who assisted the trained staff across the country. We are embarking on a new strategic plan. That's typically what they do when there's a new leader. And I suspect that partnerships are going to be really key to our future. And that could include a fabulous partnership with my favorite university, Villanova. I have an instinct, just because I know what goes on here and I know it's in the marrow of Villanova, that if you were to articulate to the right office here your desire to volunteer and work in housing particularly, that they could find a way for you to volunteer in that space. I certainly can connect you to the Catholic Charities that's in Philadelphia. But if you want to come after you get your degree and work for us at Catholic Charities USA, give me, you know, your contact information too. You're onto something very important, which is the connection between housing and health. And we have a whole program that links those two intentionally and has kind of figured out an economic model for it as well. Beautiful question. And tell your mom she's doing great things.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, I think we have one more question over here.
Hi, my name is Anna, and again, as everyone said, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us today. I don't know, this has been incredible and a really great use of our Monday evenings. Almost spinning off of Colin's question, because I think you had a really, really interesting thought there. Almost looking at Villanova, I think a lot of the students here can agree that there's a lot of privilege that we experience, and a lot of times it's difficult to step outside of ourselves and just experience the suffering that we see around us. Again, kind of echoing off of what Colin was saying, that's why I really do another shout out to the Peace and Justice Department. I think they do a great job of allowing us to understand something deeper. But again, this idea of like, we get so wrapped up in our worlds and the things that are in front of us and the struggles that seem so big, but we can't sometimes take a step outside of that. So my question was like, has this ever been an experience that you have had? And do you have any advice for individuals in this room that are also struggling with being able to understand the difficulties and the suffering that's experienced in the world, but not being overwhelmed by all of the darkness and still feeling centered in the light?
Beautiful question, beautifully articulated. So for the first thing I would say is everyone is carrying something. Everyone you encounter is carrying something, and it's almost always invisible. So people in need of mercy and help and kindness could be your suite mates or your roommates. You know, they could be your classmates. Everyone's carrying something, and often it's not visible. That I have absolutely learned over the course of my life. And knowing that, like trying to keep that front and center, I sort of ask myself, how dare I unnecessarily ruin somebody's day, or just be dismissive of somebody when I know that they could be experiencing something really, really hard. So that's the first thing. It's not just the materially poor that require our particular care. This same daughter, Sophie, she graduated in 2020 from college, so everything was canceled. She was on spring break with all of her friends when they got the news not to come back to campus, and so she couldn't say goodbye to anyone. She was really sad about that. And she knows me very well, and she turned to me and she said, "Mom, let me be sad about this," because I was rushing in to cheer her up, etc. The way she got out of feeling that genuine sorrow and sort of self-pity about this, legitimately great disappointment, she had the instinct herself. This was not for me. She had the instinct herself in giving herself enough time to be sad, to confront it, to volunteer with a local refugee resettlement entity in our neighborhood. And she masked up and wore gloves and was a contactless deliverer of bags of groceries to newly placed families who had come from all over the world. They were asylum seekers, they were refugees, and she just thought, they're also experiencing this pandemic, but they don't speak the language. Their kids can't go outside to play. They must be terribly afraid. They know no one, and they're completely isolated in a foreign land. And so delivering those groceries just got her out of her own head and forced her into a disposition of other-centeredness. That will always help you with the dark, dark stuff that we all bear witness to every day. And there are so many examples of goodness and kindness. Most of them are imperceptible, but they're happening every day. They're happening so much, they don't make the news, but they're happening every single day. And I think that you can cultivate a practice of being other-centered like that. It is what Pope Francis means when he asks us to encounter and accompany people different than us. It's mutually beneficial. And I think that the salvation of our world depends on that kind of generous other-centeredness. But a beautiful question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marco Clash. I'm a freshman student. And I just had a question about when you spoke on you were discerning whether or not to take that job, and you were praying about it for 5 days. Now, I know this may be personal, but I was asking if you could kind of give some insight of what helped you come to that decision, because it can be quite like a daunting thing to go against what you're so set and what you want, and like do what you feel God's calling you to do. So is there any advice you could give to how that happened for you?
Yes, I'm going to, even at the risk of having my new colleague, Kevin, from Catholic Charities USA here, I'm going to answer your question not about that time I prayed over those 5 days, but in the context of the Catholic Charities USA offer. It was not something I sought. And when it came down to it, the search committee was asking me to please take the step to meet with the search committee, they said, and then just meet with, it was like these multiple steps. And I got to a certain point where I had to make a decision, and I felt like there was enormous pressure on me to say yes, and that felt like they were asking me to get married and that we hadn't even been on a first date. And I didn't want to delay their process, so I thought about it, and I said no. And then I went to a lecture like this, and the person giving the lecture said, okay, everybody, let's do a little exercise. Pick any decision you have to make. It can be anything, buying a house, applying to this university, et cetera. Any decision, big or small. And immediately, my decision was, should I go forward and meet the search committee for this Catholic Charities USA job? And he said, okay, now I'm speeding you through this, but make a decision, yes or no. And so in that moment, I said, no, I'm not going to go forward. And then he said, how do you feel about that decision? And the first thing that came to my mind was regret. And I said, regret? I should pay attention to that. He went on with his talk, and then he came back at the end, and he said, okay, everyone, remember that decision you made? Same decision, but this time, give yourself permission to say the opposite. So this time in the exercise, my answer was yes, I am going to meet with the search committee. And then he said, how do you feel? What comes to mind? And I thought of the word courage. And so afterwards, when I reflected on that, on the one hand, I would have enormous regret, and yet if I went forward with it, all it would take is courage. And I think that helped me decide to move forward, and I am so thankful I did. So figuring out ways to listen to the inner voice, it will always steer you well. And that's why in an age when we are bombarded with noise and distraction and our phones and all of it, it's harder and harder to find that place of repose and genuine meditation and prayer. But your instinct, we are hardwired for goodness. So we won't make a bad decision when we are really grounded and listen to that inner voice of the Spirit.
Thank you.
Kevin, don't tell anybody. Anyone? You all have been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much for welcoming me back to your great university.